Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Welcome everyone. Our meeting of Business Finance Subcommittee. We are streaming live on Holden TV and on the Holden TV website. As always, I'll ask that if you're not talking or presenting, if you could put your microphone on mute, as we're getting a lot of feedback in the background. The intention, and Dan, I'm not sure, that might be Captain Paper.
Yeah, it's me.
The intention tonight again is, as we have, in the last couple of meetings that we've done virtually, as we move through the agenda, to ask the administration to present, and we'll form a queue of questions using the chat feature in the Google Meets space. So with that, the first item on the agenda is deliverables from May 11th, 2020, which is our last business finance meeting. I'm going to suggest, unless anyone has an objection, that as we go through the topics in our agenda, many of those deliverables relate specifically to those topics, and that we ask Dan and the administration to make reference and to point out those documents as needed when we're on those topics. So if we have no objection to that, why don't we go ahead to update on fiscal 20 budget? And Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. So I'm just going to scroll down to the executive summary very quickly, and then I'll get into the document itself. In terms of the revenues for FY20, there hasn't been a great deal of change since our previous meeting. Again, Chapter 70 will be whole, as I reported in our previous discussion. We've exceeded the revenue budget for regional transportation by almost $600,000, $599,000 and change. Excuse me. Our interest income, again, given the economy, still continues to do well. And again, kudos to Treasurer Jim Dunbar. And our charter reimbursement is certainly above the budgeted amount. However, on the Medicaid side, as I have reported from the very beginning this year, our Medicaid revenues are considerably less than what was budgeted, $900,000 plus. And this goes back to the issue from FY18, where we're still feeling those effects. At the end of the day, our revenues are going to be short the mark of almost $380,000. So I'm just going to jump down to the attachment here, and so as I have reported throughout the year, this is a Munis budget report that I convert to Excel. And as you can see, our Chapter 70 is approximately $147,000 above the budget. Regional transportation, as I said a moment ago, is $600,000 above the budget. Charter reimbursement is $27,000 above budget. Medicaid is the issue, one of the issues, the primary issue. $906,000 below the target, again, due to the issue from FY18. Our interest income is approximately $66,000 above the budget, and that will change as well. Miscellaneous, again, almost $314,000 below the mark. We have made the adjustment in the FY21 budget to reflect what we think is a more aligned figure. And again, we're showing an estimated receipts this year in interest income, in miscellaneous of almost $126,000. I should point out that I ran these reports about a week ago, so not too much has changed there. In terms of the expense budget, and I'll get to that momentarily, where we're looking at an end balance, and this is going to be a fluid number. And the reason why it's a fluid number is because, again, we're in the process of reducing purchase orders, closing out purchase orders, making adjustments where we can between revolving funds and the general fund to pick up cash in revolving funds. But and again, the one big unknown, or one big number in there that still hasn't been factored in is transportation, FY20 transportation, and how we're going to address that issue, and we'll speak to that shortly. In any event, as of a week ago, our balance in the general fund was a little bit over, projected balance was a little bit over $1 million. So between the revenue shortfall and the projected balance, we're looking at approximately a fund balance at the end of the year of $639,000 and change. As we go through the final weeks in June, it is my intent, again, as we begin the cleanup process in earnest, to make adjustments. We have transfers on the agenda for this evening, but to make adjustments within respective appropriations and to reduce the carry forward balance. And in speaking with Superintendent McCall, we're looking to keep the balance at or about $150,000, $200,000, but then to make any and all adjustments where we can to carry forward a minimum, and we are projecting a minimum of $500,000 in circuit breaker, and a minimum of $200,000 in school choice to use as offsets for the FY21 budget. Are there any questions through the chair relative to the revenues?
I don't see any through the chat, Dan, but I guess I'll ask on that last point. So if I'm understanding that point correctly, right as of today, we're projecting a balance of 640 on the year, and I think what I'm hearing you say is to draw down all but roughly 150,000 and move those funds into a revolving fund so they can be carried forward into next year.
That's correct. The mechanics, Mike, would be that as dollars fall to our bottom line, that I would continue to bring forward to this committee and then to the full committee budget transfers, for example, in transportation. We'll stay with transportation, to take any savings in transportation, move those savings into either the special ed tuition line or into benefits and insurance. If we move it into special ed tuitions, what we would do is make adjustments out of circuit breaker and back into the general fund.
Yeah.
If we move money into insurance and benefits, what we would do is look to make adjustments out of school choice, because that's the other funding source for paying for our insurance and benefits, back into the general fund and pick up that value moving forward. That's correct.
So just to clarify for anyone that's curious about that, again, to the extent that what we're doing fits within the guidelines that are presented, there are some charges that may have been made we'll call it pre-COVID times, that had we known the need to roll funds over and be able to have access to those funds year over year, might have been charged differently. And by making those adjustments, the district then is able to, again, to the extent it's within the guidelines, carry those funds forward through a revolving account and be able to access them for next year. Again, going back to the 640 number again, it sounded like the 500K for circuit breaker and the 200K for school choice are targets. I mean, obviously we're not showing a $700,000 budget or an balance or an $850,000 balance. So is there still work that's happening or still areas that we're looking at in this year's budget to try to achieve those marks?
There are, Mike, but we have made a $400,000 adjustment in circuit breaker back into the general fund. So right now, the minimum balance in circuit breaker is $400,000, and we're working to make further adjustments. The work that is ahead of us is in school choice, where right now we have a balance approximately $50,000. So we've got 150,000 more to make adjustments to, and that will be again through savings in transportation or elsewhere in the general fund.
Okay. We're saying that right now we have a balance of I don't have it in front of me, I think it was 640. We are trying to set a bogey between circuit breaker and school choice of 700. We've already, and it may be, I don't know if we've already achieved the 400 or if we're trying to do that to a transfer later today or in this meeting. So then it's just $300,000. Is it $300,000 that we're trying to I guess I'm getting a little lost.
So we've already made the adjustment, Mike.
And how much we're still trying to get to for revolving accounts.
Of the 500,000 in circuit breaker, we've already achieved a savings of 400,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 100,000 more to go, which I have the utmost confidence that we will meet easily. In terms of school choice, we have 150,000 more to go, and I have the confidence that we'll meet that as well, especially relative to savings from transportation. So I feel very confident that will happen.
So again, to follow up on my question, does that mean that for us to achieve the 700,000 marks cumulatively between those two accounts, we're still trying to reach 250, but we have 640 that we're projecting. So if everything were to come out today, if we close the books tomorrow, would we have 500, 650 minus 150 instead of the 250? So we could apply another 250 towards revolving accounts. Is that the way to interpret this?
If the books were to close today, Mike, we've got an extra $400,000 in circuit breaker. We're going to carry $640,000 would fall into E&D. If the books were to close today, $640,000 would fall into E&D. We would carry forward $400,000 out of circuit breaker, and we would carry forward approximately $50,000 out of school choice if the books were to close today.
So let me ask a better question, Dan, because I think that's very literal to the way that I asked it, and so I appreciate that. I guess my question is, if the intent is to draw down any balance to a level of $150,000 through chargebacks and charges from chargebacks and building up our revolving accounts, and seeing that we have 640, let's call it 650 for simple math, today, and if our desire was to draw that to 150, does that mean that we have 500 in addition to the 400 and the 50 that we've already moved over that we could put into revolving accounts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think Malaya has a question.
Yep. So I was just curious in reading this. I know a couple of meetings ago, we were discussing the idea of creating a transportation revolving fund. Is that no longer something you're discussing? Because it seems like you're talking about moving those funds elsewhere. Just wanted to clarify.
So a transportation stabilization and there is a difference, and that does exist now. That does exist.
Okay.
What the wild card in this equation here is how are we going to address the transportation payment to provide primary providers, AA Transportation and Vanpool.
Okay, I'll let us keep talking, and I'll ask more later if I need to. Thank you.
Any other questions on well, really on fiscal year 20 budget at this point.
So, Mike, I was just quickly just going to walk through the balances in the appropriations, if you wish, or I can jump down to the final spreadsheet and put that up there. What would you like?
So we met last on May 20th, which was about 10 days ago. I guess rather than, if there are substantive differences between what you reviewed with us then and now, that's probably worth looking at.
No. The projected balance that I shared with you tonight is pretty much aligned with the balance that I shared with you about 10 days ago.
Any other questions regarding fiscal 20 budget coming down the home stretch here? Okay. So let's move on then. Probably the last question was a good segue for the next topic. Update on amendment transportation contract with AA Transportation.
Thank you. So, as a follow-up, and again for the full committee, the chair and I had a discussion last week, and we agreed to bring this forward. I've since reached out to both providers, AA for home to school and Vanpool for special ed transportation, for the reason being that what we do for one, we should do for the other. But I'll focus on AA for the short term here. As the committee knows, I negotiated on behalf of my colleagues from 13 districts, along with my colleague from Shrewsbury, a settlement agreement. The settlement agreement was to pay our bus provider a sum of money, in this case here, 75% of the daily rate. The genesis to those negotiations was a request from the DESE at the end of March to pay our vendors, to pay them a sum of money. The DESE had also requested that for districts that have a similar provider, to partner together and to identify a spokesperson who would then negotiate a settlement. However, even once a settlement was negotiated, depending upon the district, be it a regional or a municipal, at the end of the day, the town accountant, the city comptroller, the town manager, the school committee could say yay or nay to the settlement. It wasn't across the board. So we negotiated that settlement, my colleague and myself, back in April, and we agreed to 75%. And as the committee knows, I brought this forward at our last meeting for discussion with the intent to make an amendment to the current contract for FY20. This agreement was, in essence, payment for an insurance policy payment to ensure that when the buses rolled, and again, when the advisory was first presented, the assumption was that we'd be out through early April of 2020. That was extended to early May of 2020. And now, as we all know, we're out for the balance of the year. So bringing this forward to the committee, there were some concerns. We heard the concerns, administration heard the concerns loud and clear. I have since approached AA Transportation, and I've made him aware of the issue. We've made a counter offer to him of approximately 50% of the daily rate. The response from AA Transportation is that he is not in a position to negotiate at this point in time because of the 13 districts. And since we last met, there's still a small handful of districts that have yet signed off on their contract, or they've signed off on the contract. The contract has been submitted to AA Transportation, but the payments have not been made to AA Transportation. And AA's concern is that until those payments are made, that to negotiate a figure that is less than what was agreed upon back in April could be financially problematic to him. He's not saying no, he won't, but no at this time. I'm hopeful that within the next week or so, that those handful of districts that have not made their payments or submitted their contracts will have done so. And within the week's time, we can sit down and we can negotiate a revised settlement with AA Transportation. Be happy to answer the question, Mr. Chair.
Any questions from the committee members? I don't see any in the queue. So I have one. It looks like Ken has one also. So I guess my first question, Dan, is, we're talking in percentage terms. Can you tell us what's the dollar value of the payments we would have ordinarily paid to, let's say, AA Transportation since we closed not using the service on March 15th?
There's approximately $1.3 million that is on the table here with AA, and at 75%, as I had reported before, if we had agreed to that, we would have picked up approximately $300,000 in change. With this here, with this 50% settlement, obviously we'll be looking to pick up more cash.
Okay. I'll only go to Ken.
So I guess my question is about timing. So, we have the end of the fiscal year coming up soon, and projections to make forward, but particularly with the end of the fiscal year and when we can actually book payments and that kind of thing. What are the timing implications for paying, not paying, how much we pay? Can we actually make a payment after July 1st? Can you talk about that? So
the funds are fully encumbered now. We have until July 15th under state law to clean up business from the previous fiscal year. We have, frankly, a very small window to make payments, if you will. But more importantly, this has I believe, a significant impact on both the 20 but also 21 budget. Again, with these savings, we can transfer funds into sped tuitions. We can prepay sped tuitions. We can allocate a sum of money, as we have talked about previously, into transportation stabilization. Or again, we can move money within insurances, and again, bring forward as much as possible in school choice. So the window is getting tighter and tighter. No question about that.
Okay, looks like Carol has a question.
Yes, just to clarify, the 1.3 million that you had referenced, is that just AA, or is that the total transportation to include AA plus van pool?
No, that's just AA. Currently, we have an encumbered value in the general of approximately $1.6 million. So majority of that is AA transportation, though.
Thank you.
Well, Dan, just to go back and we'll talk about different options or alternatives. What would keep us, if we have 1.6 million that's encumbered and for services that we did not receive, what would keep us from putting that 1.6 million into transportation stabilization and rolling that forward into next year?
So we can certainly reallocate the 1.6 million elsewhere within the budget. The value that we can place in stabilization is up to, I believe it'd be the $599,000, which is the value that exceeded the budget. So that's what would be deposited into the transportation, and then the balance we could reallocate. Again, we could prepay tuitions. We can make additional journal entries, so we're carrying forward more circuit breaker, we're carrying forward more school choice, what have you.
Mhm. I know none of us on the phone, I don't believe, are lawyers. And I suppose I'll just ask the question, do we have a legal obligation to pay AA for anything in relation to services that we haven't been able to use and haven't received?
No, I've had extensive conversation with our counsel. Attorney Batulis was present at the last school committee meeting. We have received an opinion, a written opinion from his firm relative to this payment here. There's also legislation out there relative to making payments under the CARES Act, and the key word that I've read is that, and I paraphrase now, but basically the language reads: communities, municipalities may pay, keyword is may pay. The language does not state must pay. And there is a distinction. There is a significant distinction. The language out there, in my opinion, and I believe in counsel's opinion as well, is not compelling language that requires us to make these payments.
We have a couple of questions that have come through the queue here. So let's go to Jeff first, and then Malaya.
Thanks. I would imagine that all of us like the idea of being able to carry forward as much money as possible. If we decided that we were not going to pay anything to AA, and if we do that, and if he decides that he is really irked about that and wants nothing to do with us in FY21, do we have a plan for busing or providing transportation to the kids if he does that?
So we have a contract through the end of FY21, and then we have 2 option years. I don't foresee any issues there. Where I foresee issues is next time we go out to bid. If we opt not to exercise the option years and we go out to bid 3 years into the contract, we may see a pretty hefty bump in the daily rate. And I'm just trying to read the tea leaves there, Jeff, in terms of that. The other thing too is there are so many unknowns relative to the fall and what bus transportation may look like. As I'll state a little bit later on, I mean, I have had some conversations with Ron relative to that. We may have 83 passenger buses with maybe 15 or 16 students on it to address the issue of social distancing. Perhaps not, but that's certainly something that's out there. We may be in a position where we have to get additional buses. Don't know how we're going to pay for them, but let's just say that we had to get additional buses. If there were, and I'm just reading the tea leaves here, but it could become problematic in terms of immediate turnaround for additional equipment where other districts maybe had made those payments. And I'm just reading the tea leaves.
Okay, Malaya.
So one of the things I recall from discussions is the question of the fact that his employees don't actually get paid, most of them, in the summer, that they collect unemployment in a typical summer. Has anyone, that's the part of the equation that I am stuck on, to be honest. I have no problem paying him even the 80% or 75% for the days that he typically would get paid. But I'm really struggling with this notion of paying for staff that he wouldn't pay anyways. So has anyone asked him specifically that question about what his savings, how that is, how he's accounting for that, I guess, in his, what he usually, I mean, does he have another income stream in the summer that we're not familiar with? Or I'm just trying to understand, and there's probably is a logical reason, but I'm trying to wrestle with that. And I know that was an issue at the bigger committee meeting as well.
So originally, AA had laid off all his drivers and all staff. As part of the negotiations, he had agreed to bring his staff back, including his drivers, and they would be involved in trainings and what have you. He had agreed that because they had been receiving unemployment, that he would make them whole, and he would make them whole from, I'll just say, for example, May 1st through the summer months, to make them whole. Again, you saw in your package, I did share with you a letter that Mr. Ernenwein sent to me about 2 weeks ago. And just the other day, he did share with me sections of his tax return, not the entire tax return. And again, we did request some information. We did request the financials, and at the time of the negotiations, he was reluctant to share that with us.
Okay, that kind of leaves us in a tough spot. Personally, that's what I would say. I also am very aware of the, obviously he's helped us in the past, and there's a community goodwill effort balance as well. A lot of the drivers live in our towns as well, but I'm really struggling with that idea of paying people that aren't usually paid anyways, and that seems earning money for him. And I'm just trying to struggle with that. That's
You're okay. So we have Linda. Linda, are you there?
There, can you hear me?
You can now.
Oh, good. Thank you. So has he heard anything back about the CARES Act funding?
We haven't talked about that in our recent conversations, so the answer is no.
Okay, just because that could affect the equation in one way or another. And
Sure.
I'm just wondering if his interest in continuing to employ some of his bus drivers, et cetera, over the summer may have to do with the fact that the CARES Act basically incentivizes employers to rehire their employees. Do you think that that's a part potentially related to his thinking?
It could be, but as you saw in the proposed draft amendment, he did state that if he were to apply for any of the federal stimulus dollars and be in receipt of them, that he would make adjustments to all districts who had made payments to him.
Right, yes, right. So thank you.
Okay, we have Ken.
So, Daryl, just a question for you, I guess, in this. At the end of the day, his business is his business, our business is the school district. So as the superintendent, what is your recommendation for what we should be doing here for our process forward for a time frame? Because I think we need to hear from you about what your take is on this.
So Dan and I've talked about this ad nauseum over the past couple of weeks. This is really an issue in terms of, and Malaya said it well, these are people who work with the district. They work not for us, but they provide a service to us through AA transportation. The funds that we've already set aside, and somebody has their microphone on.
I'm sorry, it's me again.
So thank you, Dan. So as we kind of look at what we're trying to do, I want to be fair to AA. I'm not, we don't just want to put money out there if we don't have to put money out there. But we also know this is the company that we have to work with, well into the future. There aren't other companies out there that want our business. So Ron has been extremely easy to deal with in the past 5.5 years that he has serviced the district. He has provided us bus service. He's extended buses. He's actually added larger buses to routes without actually charging us for that during the year. So he's been very supportive of the district. I wouldn't feel great about not paying him anything. I think if we were to look at this and, in all honesty, if we said, we'll give you 50% of what we were looking to pay, 60%, whatever it is. I understand that from the school committee's vantage point, for many people that we heard from the other night, there really wasn't any appetite for 75-25. So as Dan and I were talking about this, I asked him to reach out directly to Ron and talk about a 50-50 model. And if that were to be the case, I believe Ron ultimately would be okay after some of these other contracts are closed up. So that's where I'm at with this. And that's what I've asked Dan to kind of work with Ron on.
So you're comfortable with waiting at this point, but you feel that a final answer will be deliverable by July 15th, one way or the other?
I do, Ken, and the other part of it is the way we've kind of worked out our budget scenarios. We're using a 75-25 model. So anything else that we move forward with, where we would gain more funds, would help us out in FY21.
So Ron and I, obviously he knows that we're speaking about this evening, and we have a call scheduled for some point tomorrow morning. I can certainly press him on when can we sit down to negotiate. Again, it's been 2 days since he and I spoke. Perhaps in those 2 days, my colleagues have either sent him their contracts, perhaps even made payments to him. And I would like resolution of this sooner than later, because it does have an impact upon, as I said earlier, upon the 20 and 21 budget without question. Without question.
Thank you, Dan. To me, just a couple of quick comments. I don't think it's lost on anyone that we are looking at the potential of a 10 million plus reduction from the budget that school committee passed in pre-COVID times. And, we haven't gotten to it on the agenda today, but we certainly have spoken about it in past meetings. With that comes very significant cuts. When we talk about the potential of paying a vendor, and I get the sentiment in terms of, maybe we want to call more of a partner than a vendor, right? They've worked with us in the past, and I get that. But we also need to deal with the reality on the ground, which is that we're looking at very significant cuts for next year, which is going to mean reducing workforce likely in a very very real way. And we don't have a legal obligation to pay for services that we haven't received. So I guess my point here is that if we are hamstrung by continuing to encumber this money because our partner is using that as the negotiating strategy with other districts, I think they need to know that, I would suggest or would think that there's a time limit on that tactic. And at some point, we need to make a decision as to whether or not there is an appetite for some type of goodwill payment or readiness payment, I think is how others have referred to it, in anticipation of next year, or whether there's not. And we need to lay out what that timeline is. The other thing that that I'd say is part of what was discussed in our last business finance meeting was understanding the principle, for making the payment that we're making. These are real dollars, and we know that we have $1.6 million that's standing there that we could take all and apply it towards a reduction of workforce shortages for next year. So if there is some number that we ought to consider, I think the committee would want to know what are the principles that are being used. If the principle is, well, we're going to make our employees whole, even though we've laid them off and they've been collecting unemployment since March 13th, I think you already know that there's not much of an appetite for that. So when we do come back, and I'm not as into the negotiations as perhaps you folks are, but I hope that there is some meaning that's based in principle behind whatever number that we're coming to. So with that, if there's any other questions on transportation. Hearing none, let's move on to, we have a series of motions and budget transfers. I'll entertain, Rebecca, maybe the best way to do this, would you mind reading the motion, and if somebody wants to make the motion, we can make the motion?
Yes, hold on one second. Hold on. Can you hear me fine?
Absolutely.
Okay. To recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $4,718.41 from the debt service appropriation to the pupil services appropriation.
Would anyone care to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion or any comment, Dan, that you'd like to make?
Through the chair, there was a savings in debt service there. It was approximately a little bit over $50,000 remaining in there. And we're looking to take this savings and number one, to plug a deficit in the pupil services appropriation. And then number two, with the $49,000 transfer to begin the process of plugging the gap in insurance and benefits, but also to build up a balance in insurance and benefits that will allow us to do transfers, journal entries between school choice and the general fund.
Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, would you care to call the roll?
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson? Gustafson? Haynes?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Long Belial?
Yes.
Ottmeyer?
Otmar, yes.
Okay. Okay, ready? To recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $49,181.33 from the debt service appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Discussion or overview?
And again, Mike, this is the balance of the savings and debt service and to move up the benefits of insurance, to plug the gap, and again, to build the balance in benefits and insurance.
Any discussion on the motion? Turn it to you, Rebecca.
Okay, Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haynes? Long Belial?
Long Belial, yes.
Ottmar?
Otmar, yes.
Third one, to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $150,000 from the salaries and stipends appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion or overview?
And as I had presented in my report, there is a savings in salaries, and we're looking to shift some of these savings into benefits and insurance, again, to address the shortfall, but to begin the process of building up the balance to make journal entries in the next week or so.
Dennis? Oh, I'm sorry.
Any
Sorry.
discussion?
I have
I think you're
I
ready.
had a
Dennis,
question.
yes.
Dennis?
Oh, go ahead. Didn't see it. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, that's all right. My question is, I remember we got an email from the coaches asking for 25% of their stipend. Were we able to do that or not?
So through the chair, and these figures reflect that we're making a, excuse me, a payment of 10% of their stipends. So that value is approximately $10,000. You'll see that in the backup in my packet this evening. So that's been accounted for, but it was reduced.
Okay.
It was reduced from 25 to 10.
Right. Great. Thank you. That's right. I remember that now. Yes. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions or comments? Hearing none. Rebecca? Dennis? Yeah?
Dennis? Dennis?
Yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haynes? Long Delisle? Ottmeyer?
Yes.
Otmar, yes.
Okay, to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $600,000 from the transportation appropriation to the benefit and insurance appropriation.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or overview? Hearing none.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes?
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Long Delisle? Ottmeyer?
Yes.
Yes.
And one last. To recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $250,000 from the undesignated fund balance to Fund Code 30 Project 1002, line item WLT 452 to cover the field turf project.
And if I may, like just very quickly on this, as you know, we borrowed, we took last year approximately $250,000 to initiate the work for the turf project at the high school. In the process this year of doing our E&D work, we took a hit in that process because there was no allocation to a capital line. And it was at the direction of the Department of Revenue that we transfer approximately $250,000 to a line to offset that zero balance. Because in the event that we don't do that, we run the risk of taking another hit of $250,000 in the processing of excess and deficiency for FY20.
So before we open for discussion and questions, does anyone care to make this motion?
So moved.
Anyone for a second?
Second.
So hearing Dan's explanation of what this transfer or how it originated, any questions or discussion from members on the line?
Yeah, could you just say that again, Dan? I just want to make sure I follow it.
Sure thing. As you know, we use $250,000 from FY18 certified excess and deficiency to support the turf field project at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
When we did not do a transfer and allocate that cash, those dollars to a line item, when we processed our excess and deficiency for FY19, there was a shortfall in that line of $250,000. The Department of Revenue advised me that I need to cover that shortfall with this transfer. Otherwise, we will be hit again in when we process the excess and deficiency for FY20 with another $250,000 hit.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes?
Gustafson, Malaya,
Yes. Yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
46.
Long Belisle,
Yes.
Ottmeyer.
Yes.
And that's it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your help with that. All right, moving on. Contingency planning for fiscal 21 budget. And it looks like there was an updated document that was sent to us
Pay to play.
just an hour before the meeting started. So I'm not sure if I'm turning this over to Dan or to Daryl, but I'll let you guys look at each other and decide.
All right. Thank you, Mike. This will be a tag team presentation between Daryl and myself. It is supposed to be baseball season, so I guess I'll be the leadoff hitter here to start the discussion. This is an updated document that was shared with the committee at our previous meeting. And again, similar to the previous discussion, there are several tiers. The goal here in the first two tiers is to get us to the 1/12 estimated budget reduction of approximately $4.2 million. And just very quickly, there aren't too many changes. I'm sorry, this is not projecting, is it?
No,
I thought it was projecting. I'm sorry about that. Do you see it?
not yet.
All right. Sorry about that.
There you go, Dan.
Do you see it? Is it? Do you see it?
Yep, we got it now.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Tier 1. Again, there haven't been too many changes here, aside from the two bottom numbers. In the previous document, we had recommended moving $100,000 into transportation stabilization. We've now increased that to almost $490,000, $489,390. And again, this is the end result of the anticipated savings with the bus payments. The second change that we made is on the SPED summer school remote learning. Originally, we had $125,000 there. That has been revised to reflect $75,000. And again, that is a fluid number depending upon what happens with the summer. Again, just going to the middle of the document here, the school choice carry forward, as I mentioned earlier this evening, the goal is a minimum of $200,000. Secondly, circuit breaker, again, we have achieved $400,000 of the $500,000 goal, and we're looking at a minimum of $500,000 for FY21, if not more. Because of the adjustments in the estimated transfer into transportation stabilization, and then the slight adjustment in the summer school learning, the value of the tier 1 is now just under $3 million. $2,935,907, $2.9 million, and that is up significantly from the first presentation. That leaves us to get to our goal of the 4.2, approximately $1.3 million. So I'll have Daryl take it from here relative to tier 2. So I'm going to close this out, Daryl, or I'm keep this up.
Leave it up. Leave it up, and you can scroll through, Dan. It's easier to do it that way. So, I think Dan just reviewed that first tier 1. I can let you know we spent an awful lot of time trying to build tier 1 up so that the impact on staffing in terms of a 1/12 budget would not be as great. And getting close to $3 million, I think, was it's bringing an awful lot of money forward. It is, I think some of that money, and again, this is based, the transportation money that Dan has in there is based upon 75% for our in-district sped, our out-of-district sped, and our AA transportation, the yellow buses. So if it is lower than that, we will actually see more money that will be going into that tier 1. In terms of tier 2, what we've been doing over the past week and a half is really drilling down and aligning different positions with the various schools, and had many conversations with principals individually, small groups, whole teams, in terms of looking at the entire process as we kind of go through this. So what we've done is we've laid this out for you, and again, I think Linda had talked about having some more definitive numbers that are a little easier to understand as we kind of go through this process. So again, we have our document that looks similar to last time, where we had our pre-K-8 reductions, our high school reductions, and our central office reductions. And under those, that is where you can see the overall reductions that are made. Dan, if you can scroll down. And if you, right there, pre-K through 5. So what we did was we broke this up into pre-K through 5, the 2 K-8s in middle schools, and then the high school. So this is actually a breakdown of what we would be looking at in terms of reductions. So as you can see, 6 teachers in total through our pre-K through 5 reductions. No special education teachers at that level. 13 paraprofessionals at that level. No ABAs. And then we have an other column. An other column could be something such as an SLPA. An other column could be something such as or another one could be a part-time custodian or part of a custodian. We do have all of those data points as well to back all of this information up. Dan, if you can scroll down a little bit more, please, to the next page. On the top of this page, we have our 2 K-8s in our middle schools. And again, we have it broken down. We wanted to make sure that we were defining programs versus just classroom teachers and so forth. So one of the things that we wanted to define here was when we're looking at this down below under teachers, we have 0.8 strings that's included in the total. So that would be the strings teacher that is shared between several middle schools. And again, this is something that it would be programmatic in that sense. When you move over, we do have a 0.6 position at Mountview in terms of a special ed position, as well as Central Tree. And if you move farther over, we have paraprofessionals, 4 paraprofessionals. And again, 1.5 of other. And that 1.5 of other includes an assistant principal position that, we just had an assistant principal resign the other day because they are taking a principalship in another district. So congratulations to her. But, after talking with the principal, he thinks we'll be able to realize some savings there and perhaps put a team care model into play. So we're, looking at that as well. And if you look farther down, high school reductions, again, none of these are easy. All of these are painful. All of these took many hours of conversation. Bob and I have actually been holed up in the conference room in the superintendent's office for the past several days, just making sure that everything aligned correctly with these. We have 3 teachers at the high school. The 3 teachers and the 1 special education teacher all go back to retirements. So we would not fill those positions through attrition. There are 2 paraprofessionals and then 2 other positions associated with other positions within the high school. And, one of those is a position that currently is vacant in terms of a custodial position that's been vacant for the past year. So we wouldn't fill that. So if you look at the total pre-K, and Linda, this is what we were talking about before, we have a total number here of 12.8 teachers, 2 regular ed teachers, 2.6 special education teachers, 19 paraprofessionals, and 4.4 other, which were some of the ones that I described to you. The dollar amount that we get to is actually above the $4.279 million we were looking for. So there's a $300,000 buffer. These positions that we just talked about through tier 2, they're all non-professional status teachers at the time, in terms of not having to lay off a professional status teacher in terms of this particular tier. We do have a position where one person would have to move to another position based upon their licensure, but they still have the capacity to do that. So that's our first tier. This gets us basically $300,000 above that 1/12 dollar amount that we were looking at for budgeting purposes. The next step that we took was really coming back to looking at our tiers. And if you recall, last time when we talked through this process, tier 4 was actually more items, and tier 3 were more people. I made a decision to reverse those so that we could then, put the people farther down on the tier process and move some of these other items up. So this is after, again, much discussion, much conversation around what we might be able to have in reference to savings. So we're looking at a little more savings in special education tuitions. We'd look for a little more savings in instructional support and also in operations and maintenance. That gives us another $275,000. And we now have a running total of almost $5 million. We continue down from that, Dan. We go on to tier 4. Tier 4 reduction, this is where it really starts to get challenging. This is where we have teachers who are non-professional status, professional status. It really runs the gamut. And, as you can see, there are many teachers in here. And it's special ed, regular ed, lots of paraprofessionals. We have our clubs, musicals, athletics at the high school. We have a couple more administrators at central office on top of the 1.5 administrators we're already reducing. So there are many different cuts that we would be making, and these are across the board from the early childhood center to the high school to central office. Dan, if you can start scrolling down a little bit. So if you look at our reductions here in our ECC through grade 5, you can basically see that we're looking at about 8 teachers for our regular ed, 1 special ed teacher, 9 more paraprofessionals, 4 ABA PAs, and those are coming directly from ECC. And again, we are looking at ABAs at this time, in tier 4, because we really would have a difficult time cutting back on class size at the ECC. Even though our numbers aren't huge, we're still going to be in a situation where we're going to have some constraints around class size next year in terms of opening up in the fall. And Chris Smith has been very, I think, vocal and supportive of the Early Childhood Center and what we can and cannot do there. And then those other items there are items such as SLPAs. We also have, I think, some more custodians in there, some part-time secretary work, or clerical, excuse me. So by the time you're done, you have quite a few people just in the pre-K through 5 reductions. Dan, if you can scroll down to the next page, we have K-8 middle reductions. And again, you can see that there are many reductions in terms of teachers, and they are across the board. It's this is when we're talking about middle schools, this is where we're also talking about programs. So at the tier 4 level, foreign language would be eliminated in all of the middle schools. So what you're seeing here are foreign language teachers in Chocolate, Mount View, Paxton, Thomas Prince, and Central Tree, as well as maybe another teacher or another support staff down in the other column, which brings you down to that total number. At the high school, again, this would be more positions associated with some programs, but more individual classrooms. And we end up having a total down at that bottom, pre-K through 12, of almost 30 teachers, 1 special ed teacher, 11 paraprofessionals, 4 ABAs, and 12 of the other positions that fall under SLPA, custodial, clerical, administrative, and so forth. So we're now up to about $8 million through Tier 4. And finally, Tier 5, these are, again, wholesale reductions associated with assistant principals, with any type of our support systems for maintenance, technology, our high school, you can see our high school, it's more assistant principals, clerical, custodial, paraprofessionals. Same thing over at our pre-K through 8. And Dan, if you can just scroll down there a little bit, please. We have our K through 5 reductions. We have our teachers. We have more paras, and we also have assistant principals across the board, and that's what those are right there. K through 8, again, more programs, more just regular staffing associated with classes. And again, some of these might be small to see, but under Paxton Center, that's not a 6, that's a 0.6, just to be clear. And again, it's wholesale paraprofessionals. We're just going right down the line. And then high school reductions, more staff across the board. And we're talking about getting into some, serious programs by this time. And it's a challenge, to say the least. It would be a challenge to pull all this off in a way that would really be beneficial to kids. So if we scroll all the way down, we have a total amount here. Here's 1 through 5. Here's our total teacher amount. It's almost 60 teachers, almost regular ed, excuse me. Under special education, it's 4.6 teachers. Paraprofessionals, 46. ABA, 4. And other, all of the items that I mentioned, all the positions I mentioned earlier is about 27. And that total reduction amount is $10.4 million. It's over 140 staff, 140 FTEs, which is well over 10% of our overall staff in the district. We had talked about some other mitigation strategies a few weeks ago. I can tell you we have had conversations with our unions. We are still in the midst, Jeff Carlson, we were talking today, we have some upcoming negotiations with our unions around some mitigation strategies that we'd like to propose. We've already been told there's one union that did not want to do that at this time, and really wait to see what happens with federal funding. But when we come back to this, we're looking at our increased athletic fees. This was something we talked about. We've had the same athletic fees for approximately 8 years. So this would be an increase of $50 a student, a sport, which could bring in approximately $45,000. Parking at the high school, there is a parking fee at the high school, of $150. It has been open to juniors up until, I believe, 2 years ago. We would open it back up for juniors. That would bring in perhaps another $30,000. The COLA and STEP lane freeze, this was something that we had talked about earlier. If all staff, all employees were to remain at FY20 levels, we would save about $1.8 million in salaries and COLAs and so forth. I can tell you that after meeting with WREA last week, I believe, or the week before, my weeks are kind of melding into one another. We feel as though we will probably be in a good place in terms of having a tentative agreement around a furlough day for WREA, which would save the district approximately $235,000 moving into next year. So those are the mitigation options that we have, basically right now at this time. And again, I want to thank all the administrators for putting an amazing amount of time and energy into this. This was a really emotional process. because people are talking about teachers and kids and experiences that they're going through. This is also something where I have to put kudos out to all the people who are attempting to support us as much as possible in terms of putting out some good vibes for us. There is not a lot of talk in reference to what I'm hearing from Boston. It does sound as though Boston is thinking, the legislation is thinking that the federal stimulus money will get here. There will be a bill passed. There will be more money coming to the states. Those monies will come to regional districts and municipalities. We're just not sure what the time frame will be. We need to be able to work on 1/12 through December, through at least December, and that's what I've charged Dan with doing. How do we get through this? And if you can see right here, tiers 1 and 2 allow us to get through the entire year, FY21, on a 1/12 budget. So, with that being said, we can take some questions.
So Daryl, I guess just a logistics, Daryl and Dan, a logistics question before we open it up. In Dan's packet that was sent to the committee last night, there was an attachment C, which appeared to be an update of the proposed tiered cuts. And then again today, about an hour before the meeting, we received the overview that you, or the document that you just shared and walked through with us. Am I correct in assuming that this document then supersedes the one that was in our packet that we received last evening?
That's correct, Mike. And actually, Mike, the attachment C was just a 2-page summary that was requested by the committee from the previous document. That was just one of the deliverables. This document here now supersedes all that information.
Okay. I mean, attachment C looks very similar to what we had looked at previously, except that there were some updated numbers in it.
Yep.
But, I get the point. So with that, I think we have a few folks here. So why don't we go to Malaya and then Linda?
Okay, if I cut out, I'll just type it. So one of my concerns with this is obviously the large impact on special education. And I know it is likely unavoidable, but I have concerns from 2 perspectives. The first being that I know you have said in the past that the paras are not all tied to IEPs, but a reduction of that many paras is surely going to affect our ability to meet our students' needs. So I am really curious to hear, I don't know if Christine wants to speak or Daryl, about how you plan to still meet our students' needs while cutting in the first 2 rounds, which we probably would need to do through tier 2, 19 paras and 2.5 sped positions. I'm concerned about it from a programmatic perspective and making sure we're still meeting our legal obligations. My second question regarding that, though, and I'm hoping you can shed some light on this, is that I know there is, DESE last week mentioned and reminded districts of the effort clause, and going to be still in compliance with that if we are reducing so many sped positions, and how that is going to play out.
So real quick before we jump to that, Dan, if you could either, my suggestion would be either stop sharing, or probably it wouldn't be a bad idea to keep the document that we're referring to up on the screen and maybe the summary screen, because I suspect that people will go back to that over the course of our discussion. Malaya, the second question for me cut out. And so I don't know if you want to just give a real quick
can you hear me?
Recap.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The second question was that DESE last week reminded districts of the maintenance of effort requirement in terms of special education funding, that it's, and I'm sure Christine can explain this in more detail, but basically that districts to receive federal funds should not be, have to maintain a certain level of special education funding. And so it's seeing all of these cuts that impact special education, I am still if we are still met, so I'm just raising the question.
If I may, Chair, respond to Malaya's questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is Chris. Maintenance of effort will be maintained. Our tuition budget line is already dramatically substantial, so it impacts, it bears evidence on the maintenance of effort. So I have a little worry that we'll meet our maintenance of effort, but that's always something that's calculated as we look at our budgets. I think that Dr. McCall said it clearly enough that none of the presentation tonight is good for kids. None of it is what we want to do. None of it is our belief that we're going to be able to meet the needs of our regular ed kids or our special ed kids. So we are turning ourselves inside and out, trying to figure out what to put forward, how to do that so that we can, still call ourselves school. That's why so many, everything went before we started to touch teachers. The few positions that you do see relative to special education are there because we've looked closely at our numbers, we've looked closely at attrition, and have made determinations that with changes in practice, we would be able to move into different models that, again, they're not where we are right now, but then again, none of what we're proposing do we actually lay our head down at night and think is what's in the best interest of our communities and our children.
I appreciate that. I would hope as we move forward, if we do end up having to make these substantial cuts, that you would at some point explain some of those other models to the parents who would be impacted, so they can envision what this will look like. So.
And you know what, Malaya, just to kind of go through this a little bit, one of the things that would happen is in terms of, you look at that bottom number, paraprofessionals. So that includes many kindergarten paraprofessionals. That includes regular special education support paraprofessionals. It doesn't include one-on-one paraprofessionals who are attached to a student through an IEP. But I can tell you that it's just going to require, if we've got to this $10 million reduction level, it would require a great deal of schedule manipulation in order to ensure that we are being, legally obligated. So, would we be able to do it? Yes, because we do have over 200 paraprofessionals in our school district, we have a much higher ratio of students to paraprofessionals than most school districts in the state. So that's good for us, typically. The issue is we end up having problems, as we kind of move forward, because we feel as though, we built this strong special ed program and we slowly have to pick away at it. Again, the 4.6 special education teachers, when you look at the overall amount, it's a small amount, but it's still 4.6 teachers who would be providing special ed services.
Yeah, I completely understand all of that, and I appreciate you explaining a few more details, so that's helpful. It will, obviously, I have a special interest in that as the liaison to the CPAC, but also a legal perspective, just make sure we're not setting ourselves up for more problems down the road. So thank you.
I agree.
Okay. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So just to follow up on Malia's point, I'd rather spend the money on the kids than on lawyers. So I just would echo what she had to say on that. So one question I had was, are other unions, have we discussed furloughs with any of the other unions? And then I had a couple follow-up questions.
So Linda, we've had the initial discussions. We have meetings set up with many of them that we'll be having these conversations with. Again, what will happen is with some of these other unions, the savings will be nominal. So it's not going to have a huge impact on the overall reductions, but we're still in that process. Yes.
Okay. And then let's see. Oh, yes. I wanted to ask, why did you choose languages for middle school languages as something to cut?
When we put this out there to building principals, languages was, they don't want to cut anything. So that's first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and I think I've said this to this group before, it's pick your poison. It's a dilemma. What they're trying to do, they're trying to be consistent with what they're doing, especially middle school's tough because you have buildings like Mount View that have 2 teams and they're, with a lot of kids, close to 300 kids in a grade level. And then you have a place like Paxton Center where your 6 through 8 has only 170 kids. And you can only choose so many different places. You need science, you need math, you need history, you need ELA. So you have those 4 key core subjects that you have to have. Foreign language is an addition, which is one of the reasons why when you look at it, it's not mandated. Right.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And then very quickly, I promise, the $200,000 cut in special ed tuitions. How are we going to make that happen?
So Dan and Chris talked about this, kind of went through, how that would work ultimately. They are looking at perhaps having some more savings associated with out of district placements and so forth. They felt confident that they can have that in there, but again, it would be down the line. That's why it's not up in tier 1. We didn't want to put it up there. I can tell you, and just to go back, Chris, I'll let you answer in a second. What was, was it at Brighton that just made the announcement around reductions in their staffing? They were pink slipping people this weekend, and it was on, I believe, one of the Boston news channels Saturday night. But their reductions were I think they were drama teachers at the high school and foreign language teachers at the elementary schools. So, again, many of the wealthier districts, they have more layers from which they can then say, okay, you know what, we might, first graders, it's great if they can learn Mandarin, but we don't have the funds to do it. Well, we might be at the stage where we can't even offer Spanish to our middle school students, which is a sad state of affairs.
It sure is. Yes.
I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that some of that savings will also come from using our IEPs to carefully reviewing our IEPs and writing them to reflect the maximum amount of circuit breaker money. So again, that will happen anyway under my eye for the next year, and that's a projection on some of the savings that we could realize out of that.
I see. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
All right, we have Jeff and then Carl.
Thanks. I suppose I'm looking at this more in a process light. Really, I'm trying to see if there's any way we can buy time. And the reason I say that is simply this: there are three major question marks that we have here, or at least that I'm looking at. I know Mike talks about the 3 valves, so maybe I'm borrowing from him. I have my 3 question marks. One, we don't know what federal aid will be, if any. We have no idea what state aid is going to look like. And the third thing hanging out there is what are the DESE requirements going to be in terms of reopening for the fall, and how is that going to impact our dollars? Because we don't know what that's going to be. I heard from someone on their reopening group today, and they hope to have a draft form of that guidance at the end of June, which doesn't really help us tonight. But I guess if we were to look at the letter of the law, we do have a little bit of help here. I think it's safe to say that all the towns, or at least most of the towns, are going to vote down the budget that we've approved, which means we go to 1/12. That action alone gives us 30 days. If we ask Commissioner Riley, we can get an additional 15. And I can't imagine a worse set of circumstances for asking for an extension. So basically that puts us into early August before we have to have some sort of a budget answer to the one that's most likely going to be shot down here in the end of June in our various towns. So that's good. I guess that's the good news. I never thought I would say it was good news that our budget is being shot down, but this is a strange world. I am concerned. I completely understand why we're looking at the $10 million cuts. I think that's logical. I understand the 20% figure. That's what the state has projected for itself. So I totally understand that's why we're looking at that. We also know that in 0809, the cuts from the state were more on the order of 28%. We also know that this crisis is worse than what happened in 08 and 09. So I'm not sure that the cuts that we see from the state aren't going to be closer to 30%. Again, that's something we don't know yet. So that concerns me. And as far as waiting for federal aid, I think we all know that such a program would have to go through the White House, and to expect anything remotely constructive, helpful, competent from this White House, well, you won't see me making that bet. So that's my thought. That's what I've been trying to figure out here the last several days as I've been looking at these various numbers. If there's anything, please, Daryl, Dan, somebody tell me there's something else that I'm missing that could give us more time to look at these pieces so we can make an educated guess and not just throw darts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll again, you're definitely going down the right path. When we go into 1/12, typically, I will request of the commissioner, and it has always been granted, the extra 15 days. So that will put us into August. That does give us buys us more time. We're tied to MGL around non-professional status teachers in a June 15th deadline. So I was part of an email thread today with superintendents from across the Commonwealth where we were pushing our organization to work with the legislature around passing some type of temporary law or hold around that June 15th date. So we're not, literally, it will be thousands and thousands of teachers in the Commonwealth who will be pink slipped, because this is happening pretty much in every community in some form or fashion. Maybe not to the extreme that we're at, but it's happening. So, in terms of what we might be able to do, it's when you talk about the reduction, that is true, but much of the difference was made up with those back when we had the recession. Much of the difference was made up with the ERA funds, and I think Dan brought that information. It was either in your packet, I believe, this time around, because that had been one of the requests for information around how much, what we did actually get. So, and this is from everyone that the higher ups in the state who we've spoken with, Desi, who has spoken at the federal level and so forth. Jim McGovern, there will be some type of federal stimulus package. There will be a support package, another COVID-19 package. It will be the last one, but there will be another one. There will be more funds coming. We just don't know, as you said, we don't know how much it's going to be. The state doesn't know how much it's going to be. The state, again, is sitting on almost $4 billion in rainy day funds. But again, rates are so low, they actually took a bond out on $1 million to help pay for things, because they can keep their rainy day fund. It doesn't affect their bond rating, and then they can take out basically a loan for $1 million to pay off some of the different things they're doing. So Baker is, being very cautious and careful about the funds. The other thing that happened back in 2008, the state wasn't sitting on a rainy day fund as large as we are right now. So there will be a push from, I think, the majority of the House and the Senate to tap into those funds if the federal funds do not end up reaching us in a manner that doesn't cause utter destruction of school districts.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, attachment B is the listing from approximately 10, 11 years ago of the federal stimulus dollars that the district received at that time for both SF grant monies and also Ed Jobs grant monies. Attachment B.
I was just going to say thank you for all of that, and I am encouraged to hear that there's talk of at least looking at moving that June 15th deadline. If there's anything we can do as the committee, I think that would be 100% worthwhile, because I don't. That's the last thing anybody wants to do, is make these cuts. That's the last thing anybody wants, and if we have to do it, I want to do it with actual hard number data, as best information as we can possibly have. And if that means waiting, by God, that's exactly what I want to do. So
I
thanks.
totally agree. Thank you.
Yes, I can tell you that it would it's not a strong probability that it will happen, but we are pushing for it, and there are discussions happening. I'm really thinking it probably won't happen.
Okay, we have Carl up next.
All right, thank you. So wanted to know if you would be able to, and part of it is, I think this is going to be something that question would probably at least come up at the full meeting, or at least to kind of be able to talk. So it ties into the budget and everything that's been sent out with all these cuts and kind of everything that kind of gets us down to 10 million under. As a lot of details in this, and I think it's probably maybe like an 80% solution of where we need to be. And what I'm getting at by that is it's a cut. It's just based on seemingly everything in the district being business as usual, but we have a lot less money. And we know that whatever the fall is going to look like, it's not going to be business as usual. Realistically, we've probably got two scenarios that we can look at for the fall, and they'll have different kind of budgetary implications, with one scenario being that we're still completely on remote learning and no students are in school, or another scenario where you actually have students in our building and we're paying for temperature checks, we're paying to provide everyone PPE, providing everyone masks, bottled water because we can't drink from fountains. And so I think the budget-wise, those are going to look a little bit different. Maybe not drastically different, but there will be some difference in kind of those two scenarios budget-wise. And especially the scenario of having students in the building, we're definitely going to be adding costs that I think aren't captured, which leads to potentially more cuts on top of everything that's been laid out here. And so I'd seen, I think in one of the attachments that were sent out, there was, I recall seeing a note about starting to get quotes or estimates for kind of all that, like additional PPE, additional cleaning supplies and things like that. Certainly, I mean, even if we can, the sooner we can at least kind of get a rough order estimate on that? I mean, are we talking like an extra $1 million we'll have to add to the budget, an extra 2, an extra 5? Because, I mean, if we're getting, and I understand that part of it is that we still don't have a clear picture of what the requirements are going to be like, because if it's going to be wiping down every single desk, every single touch point between classes when the students leave, that's going through a lot of Clorox wipes that they're pretty hard to come by anyway. And so, so there's kind of that piece of it in terms of just the supplies, additional material that would be needed for opening up in the fall. And tied into that is kind of at least being able to talk decisions in terms of custodians, because they're the ones that we're going to be needing more work from in order to clean these buildings. And we're going to have looking at having less of them. And so I don't know, it would be worth talking, or to be at least to be able to highlight that we're cutting custodians over teachers, even though we're going to be needing more custodians if we are actually there in the fall. If we're remote, then that argument doesn't necessarily hold up. But it's almost like you have to have 2 parallel budget plans for these 2 different scenarios of being remote and students in the building. And they, again, some things are going to be the same, and some things there's going to be some differences. And so I just at least wanted to kind of highlight that kind of pieces that I think we're still kind of missing that will kind of help us kind of refine this. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be refining it in an unfavorable way, talking especially the additional materials, additional requirements, additional transportation needs if we're cutting our number of students on a buses by 4. So I appreciate the work to get us this far. But I say, I think there's still some pieces I think that we're missing, and it's not, at this point, we might be able to get some estimates, but I think it's just, and it ties back to what Jeff said in terms of having being able to trade for some time to get some better pictures of this. But of course, as you mentioned, with non-professional teachers, we don't have that option. So I'll leave off with that. But.
If I could just a couple of things. Number one, I had put in my executive summary that there were a number of activities that were in process relative to PPEs. Number one, back in March, we ordered disinfecting sprayers. They had been back ordered for the better part of 2 months. Those are in the process of being received now. Those dollars have been fully encumbered, and for those items that have been received, the bills are being paid or will be paid. Number two, I'd say about a month or so ago, I ordered approximately 5,000 masks that were distributed, and those have been received, and those invoices have been paid. Number three, we were in the process of ordering additional PPEs, and that includes the thermometers, the mask, etc. We're using our nurse grant funds for those, but we're also using the balance of lines within the general fund to purchase those items as well.
And also to add to that, Dan, the COVID-19 stimulus funds that came through, that we're actually in the process of filling that grant out now. About $50,000 of that will go toward PPE. I can tell you, after being on a phone call with the commissioner on Tuesday, the expectation from the state is that students will, in the same way they bring their own backpacks, their own notebooks and so forth, they will bring their own masks to school. Unless they are unable to afford them, the expectation is kids will have their own masks. So again, I think one of the things we're trying to do is be proactive with this. The commissioner is trying to pull together some, kind of down and dirty, here's what we think you're going to need to open up in the fall, if you open up, as Carl said, and basically a list, because he thinks the earlier we order, and he's exactly right, the earlier we order, the more likely we will be to get the items prior to school opening, because if we're behind the 8 ball, we're going to be opening school without the proper PPE for everyone that we need. The other part of it, Carl, is it's really there are a couple different models that you're talking about. One would be pure remote, which could happen if there is another outbreak over the summer and it becomes worse. Then yeah, that could definitely be the case. But the way it's kind of playing out right now, that's not the expectation. The expectation is actually we would be back in school. Now, what that actually looks like could be very different. How social distancing works on busing, you're exactly right. We're not sure how that would work. Whether or not we would be 1 week on, 1 week off in terms of school. So it would be a hybrid model. So there are many things that are being thrown out there. I can tell you the commissioner is planning on coming out with a detailed overview of what the expectations will be for schools in the fall. And this is going to probably be toward the end of June, which is good. And he said basically school districts will have about 10 to 15% flexibility in terms of what they can do. They're going to be much more prescribed with how we are to do things, which is the exact opposite of what happened this spring. They kind of left it open to everybody, and that's why everyone was all over the place in terms of remote learning, in terms of synchronous versus asynchronous learning, all of those different types of things. So I think the consistency will help us. Once we have that model, as you said, Carl, I think that will help us figure out what we need to spend, what we need to then set aside in order to purchase those items, such as cleaners and PPE and so forth.
So thank you for that. I have a few tactical questions that I want to go through. The first, Jeff had made a reference to what I've brought up many times is kind of the 3-valve analogy when it comes to identifying or estimating the size of the problem, right? And so, the first being we move the 1/12 budget. The second being the cash flow impact by virtue of being in 1/12 budget. And then the third being the total reduction or the anticipated reduction in state revenues. And so just for those who are following along, who may not have seen past school committee meetings, the first valve, the reduction to 1/12 budget, is about a $4.3 million impact. The third valve, the assumption here is that there is a 20% reduction in state revenue. To put that in context, we have heard of numbers as high as, and this is probably 6 weeks old at this point, 28% reduction in state revenue. The assumption that's being used here is a 20% reduction in state revenue, which equals about $6.5 million. I want to come back to the second, which is the cash flow impact. Have we had the opportunity yet to determine what cash flow impact we might have by being in 1/12 budget and what the magnitude of that impact would be?
So, Mike, we will have a problem in October 1. We'll be in deficit approximately $1.3 million in October.
So if I understand that correctly, Dan and others, saying that differently, we do not want to be in a situation where we start school, under a certain model, and we find ourselves getting to October or November and needing to make additional cuts. That's going to have a very detrimental impact to students, above and beyond the impact of eliminating workforce at the offset. And so, I wonder then if we anticipate that we're going to be in 1/12 budget, and I heard the superintendent say we need to anticipate that we're there through December, that ought to be factored into what we consider to be the size of the problem. So let me go to the second question, tactical question. And that is, again, we were trying to, look for data points to determine what the size of the state reduction could be, understanding that the last recession that we had in 2008 was probably the biggest impact, and recognizing that what we're hearing from our legislators is that this problem is likely larger and perhaps for a longer period of time, going over multiple fiscal years. Have we had the opportunity to go back and understand what the impact was to state revenues as we entered recession years 2008?
I haven't looked at those figures yet, Mike.
Okay. Does anyone besides me think that that might be a good exercise to do? Daryl, you're shaking your head. Yes.
I do, Mike. When I'm thinking about this, and again, I also want to go back a little bit because to the cash flow, because you're bringing up a good point. And Dan, the only thing I wanted to confirm with you is, as you know, as unfortunately we've done 1/12 many times, and one thing that we do know is that we can go over or under from month to month without an issue. And that's directly from DESE on several occasions. We're typically well under in July. We're well under in August. We're somewhat okay in September. We could probably still be somewhat okay in October. That's the only thing that I'm a little kind of, I'm misunderstanding this a little bit, Dan, and we can definitely kind of go through this, but I wasn't expecting the dollar amount to be over October 1 so quickly.
There are 3 pay periods in October, and that's what causes the problem. But you're correct. We can carry over funds from month to month. We have some fairly heavy expenditures though in July. We have a $2 million payment to Worcester County Retirement as part of our annual assessment. Number one, that has a big kink in the arm. Puts a big kink in the armor.
And real quick, and I apologize for having these conversations now, but we pay that ahead, correct?
Yes, we do.
And we do not have to pay it ahead, do we?
We don't, but then there's additional. Right. There's an additional charge. The figure right. is.
So there's a savings when we pay ahead. What I'm saying is, if we were to be able to extend this, I'm just looking at this over the long run versus saving, a little bit of money in July. That's all. So that can be another conversation that we can look at.
So I guess my ask here, and I'm feeling like I'm somewhat repeating myself, probably at least 4 or 5 or 6 times on this particular topic. But it seems to me that we ought to really be able to crystallize in on what exactly payments we need to make, and if there is in fact a shortfall, to me that ought to be part of the planning number that we need to address. And so if that's $1.3 million on top of 10, or if that's some number less, because in the long run we may not recognize savings on making an early retirement payment, but it saves us some dollars in a time when we're cash strapped, then that's worth knowing. I guess there's some other folks that have other questions as well that have popped up, but I guess, Daryl, if you can walk us through what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. We've heard the date. We've asked you in the past about a threshold date. We heard June 15th for pink slips for the teachers union. Can you walk me around the tiered process and the decision making that needs to happen, and the timeline, or the threshold and the triggers that need to happen for the different tiers to be, or portion of the tiers to be exercised? How does that happen operationally?
So operationally, when we're looking at the various tiers, tier 1, there's no issue. If we were just to say we need to save $3 million, there are no, we have our new positions in there, but we haven't actually hired them yet. So there are no true timeframes associated with that. Once you get to tier 2, that's when you get into the June 15th deadline, and that's MGL. You have to do it by that time. That's any non-professional status teacher. There are many non-professional status teachers in tier 2. So in order for us to get to tier 2, we are making a decision by next Friday, which is the 12th, where we would have letters written, ready to go out to those non-professional status teachers. Tier 3, when we're looking at that, that's really those other reductions that we talked about, the other dollar amounts associated with some of the sped tuition, some of the savings that we'll have around special education, with circuit breaker and then instructional support and operation maintenance. Nothing with Tier 3. Tier 4, that's going to be, if we're looking at how we're going to move forward with this, Tier 4 would include many non-professional status teachers. And once we start getting into this Tier 4 arena, that's also where we're looking at professional status teachers, a lot of professional status teachers. So that time frame, again, looks a little different. The non-professional status teachers, any place where we have non-professional status teachers in the reduction process, and we have all that, that requires us to make a decision by the 15th of June. The letter is in hand. So that's where we're at with this. Now, what we have to do is look at this, and it's a little bit of a crapshoot because we could make drastic reductions across the board to reach that $10 million threshold. But we are going to be making many reductions in terms of non-professional status teachers, as well as a lot of professional status teachers. And what happens there is you run into issues associated with bumping rights, and it ends up being a spider web in terms of putting people in different places and filling spots. So it's a arduous, long process. If we were to be in Tier 4 and actually attempt to do that, it would be a 24/7 kind of exercise for a few days.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just trying to reconcile two things that I've heard you say, and I appreciate the sensitivity of this. I really do. But I think we're talking about, what's going to transpire or could very well transpire in the next 10 days or less than the next 10 days. So what I'm reconciling is if we're in Tier 4, but what I'm also hearing is that the threshold for professional and non-professional status teachers, at least, is the same. It's June 15th. And if that's the case, I think we all will come to likely agree that come June 15th, we're not going to know or have any clarity around what the level of state reductions are going to be. Notice I say what the level. I'm not saying if there's going to be a reduction in state funding. And that reduction is on top of the reduction for moving to 1/12 budget. So, I'm just trying to understand, going back to some of the sentiment that Jeff and others have raised, what is the plan on June 12th? And then what is the plan going after that, with the understanding that we're modeling about a $10 million reduction from what was passed. We have some mitigation strategies that we're attempting to work in place in the next less than 10 days. And we're not going to have any more clarity into how deep we're going to be cut in that intervening time frame.
And again, one of the items that we wanted to do was do the exercise, bring this back to the school committee and look at it and be able to say, if we're looking at a time frame, not a time frame, but a total dollar amount, I do not think it's going to be $10 million. And, and again, I'm not going to bet my house on it, but I think it's probably going to be more in the $4 to $5 million range by the time you're done. I think the Tier 1 and Tier 2, maybe getting a little bit into Tier 3, we will probably be in that range with federal money coming in. But again, that will not occur before probably September or October. So I think that's where we have to look at this a little more proactively. We could definitely go through and make a decision to reduce all of those non-professional status teachers and professional status teachers. Professional status, it's different. There is no time frame associated with them. It's not the same law. There is no law. So if it were in the contract, if there was a contractual obligation, yes, there would be, but we don't have that. So we have flexibility with our professional status. We don't have flexibility with our non-professional status. So what we would have to do is go back into this, which is, again, what we're already doing, and looking at what we need to do in terms of pink slipping people. And then we would fill in the slots afterward with our professional status.
So again, I think that I perhaps misunderstood what I thought I heard you say before, which was that the time frame for both professional status and non-professional status was the same. I'm hearing you say that that's not the same, so perhaps that's good to give us a greater degree of flexibility. But still would like to understand, and if it's not coming today, two things that you just said. Something is telling you that this is not a $10 million problem. This is more of a $4 or $5 million problem. I'd love to understand the principles behind that, and I'm sure that the rest of the committee would love to as well. And then second is again, laying out for us operationally how this plays out and what the triggers are. And I think that we've been asking for that for some time. So it sounds like 615 is for non-professional status. There's some other trigger for professional status. At what point in time is the district forced to make what we know are going to be very difficult decisions, and laying that out for us in a way that's clear to understand and clear for the community to understand?
Sure. So what we'll do is we wanted to put this together for you to see the numbers associated with what would happen if we were to go through the different tiers. I will look at how I can make it a little more clear for people to understand prior to the, hopefully the meeting on Monday, or even sometime next week, where we'll be able to define it for everyone, so they'll be able to see, here's what the dollar amount is, here are the staff that we're going to ultimately have to reduce, whether or not they are pink slipped by the 15th of June, or it's a professional status teacher or a program teacher, foreign language, whatever it might be, after the fact. So we can do that based on,
the question to me of what's missing in these tiers, I think you've articulated that there is a tiered approach. I think we see that, because we have different tiers that are laid out. I think my question, and I suspect others may have a similar question, is at what point do we find ourselves exercising those tiers? And at what point does the district need to take action? That is not clear, and it hasn't been clear all along.
Sure. Okay. We'll clear that up to ensure that everyone kind of has that understanding across the board.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we have Ken, and then Malaya has another question as well.
All right, so I just want to lay a few things out there, and I don't know if there are questions that have to be answered right this moment or later in the meeting. First off, again, I don't think this is a right now thing, but the END being in tier 1, do want to make sure that the district leadership is okay with that, that's something that they're comfortable with. Daryl's nodding yes to that. It does leave us somewhat susceptible to 9C cuts next year. The question I think that Mike was intimating a little bit about pink slips, what I'm hearing is that we would need to pink slip the non-professional staff teachers through all the tiers, because if we don't, that option's off the table, with the hope that we would be able to bring them back before the school year starts if things change. But we can discuss this on Monday night, but the assumption is that by June 15th, anyone who's non-professional, who's in any of those tiers, receives this pink slip with the hope we can bring them back.
Exactly.
We don't actually have to make any other cuts until the school year even starts.
Right.
Right. But the pink, anyone in any of the tiers has to know. And hopefully we bring them back, and hopefully they'd still be available I hope they get a job, but hopefully they'd still be available from our perspective if we bring them back. The athletics fees, I just want to make sure I'm a little clear on this. So for instance, the middle school athletics, $62,000 number, families pay $125 a kid for that. So is that the money that would be on top of fees, or are we not actually realizing any savings because we're not bringing in, like, What is that number?
That number is for high school only.
No, for the middle school line, we're cutting that in tier 2, right? So
That's a reduction.
So is that $62,000 reduction on top? So are you saying that in the past, whatever parents paid for fees, right, was covering X, and then the $62,000 came out of the general budget? Okay.
Yep, $62,000 covers salaries.
One question you probably don't know the answer to right now, but I'm just curious to know for Monday is how many kids actually play middle school athletics. I can do the math from the high school from what you gave us, that it's about 900. But
it is 900, yes.
Is it but for the middle schools, it'd be good to know, to see like how much could you actually make that up in fees. We can't pay for other things with fees but we can pay for extra programs with fees. The obviously what I forgot if Carl just said this at the moment, but what Carl said is true. I think immeasurably true, that until we know what school looks like, we don't know what we should actually be cutting. So I'm not going to name types of positions because that doesn't seem polite, but if we're completely remote, there are certain staff that we don't have the need for, and we have the need for other staff. If we're hybrid, we have more needs. If we're completely back, we're never going to be back to normal. So I think to Mike's question, at least from my perspective, we have a June 15th deadline for making cuts for non-professional staff status, not cuts, but pink slips, right? It's effectively cuts. Mm-hmm. But we don't really have a deadline until school starts, until people have served a day in the job, right? And have become an employee in that school year to actually make any other cuts, so that, because you don't want to cut a whole bunch of teachers and then be remote and then realize, oh, okay, what I really should have cut was cafeteria and maintenance. And I say that with apologies to those people, and I actually need more teachers. So the longer you can delay that is important. Not that you need to plan for both of them, but I don't believe we need to make any cuts at all until the day before school starts. It's not very polite, but I think that is true, and also gives time for mitigation from things like union negotiations. There's a $1.8 million number that would be helpful, that we don't have there, and what other federal mitigation comes in. So my understanding is pink slips all the way down the tier by June 15th, but we don't actually have to cut anything else until we would actually make that expense, right? Is that true? Yes.
So the way, and again, when we've looked at this, we have no obligation to the only reason there's an obligation associated with June 15th is the MGL, which is why everyone's pushing to change it, but it won't change. There are no other laws associated with notifications. Some contracts with certain unions in other districts, they do have notification requirements. We do not.
And the money we're paying teachers now is in arrears for services already offered. We're not making any, so it's not like we can reduce summer money. It's once they start working in the fall that we're incurring new obligations to pay folks. Is that
exactly
for the teachers at least?
Right, their cycle begins, in September. Yeah. They're not a July to June.
Okay.
So just to follow up on that point, and I appreciate the clarification, again, making the distinction between professional status and non-professional status. I think I would go on to make the point, and certainly happy to be corrected, that while we may not have a legal obligation to recognize or notify someone that their employment is no longer going to be continued until they start working for next year, as a practical matter, that's not practical, right? There is a level of planning that needs to occur for next year. And I presume that, I guess I don't presume to know what is involved and what the lead up to that level of planning is. But that's part of what we're trying to understand from the administration, right? So, again, if the perspective is, look, we have non-professional status, we need the pink slip, we hope that we're able to bring them back. But if we learn more over the summer, and but by some point in time, and I don't believe it's the day before classes start, we need to know what what are the triggers? What are the lines in the sand, and what decisions need to be made? And that's the plan. I mean, that's the level that I think is what we're trying to understand here, and how that aligns with the information that we expect to be coming in, whether that's, you know, better information from the federal government or better information from the state. And that, to me, is what we're trying to get to.
I get it. So a date certain associated with different triggers associated with reductions, associated with additions, planning out the start of school. That makes sense.
So, well, it does. And I'll give you an example of a date that we've missed. You know, we have coming up on the agenda discussion about the use of excess and deficiency. And there are different ways that you can use excess and deficiency. One way, one option was to put a motion forward for this fiscal year to draw down a certain number of dollars for excess and deficiency, and then roll a corresponding sum into revolving accounts to give us the option to be able to use those dollars the next year. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it was an option. But we need to give the towns 45 days notice to oppose it. We've missed that deadline. And so what I don't want to have happen is that we need to understand and we need to communicate what our options are as we go forward with respect to different mitigating practices, with respect to timelines where we need to make decisions. And then we need to have some transparency and conversation around those decisions in the context of those timelines. We've already missed one. I'm not sure how big of a deal it is. I'm not sure if we've missed others. But without having the plan and the timeline in front of us, it's hard to know what others are out there. Sorry, I felt compelled to add to Ken's or clarify a point that Ken was making. We have Malia and then Linda up next.
Okay, most of what I was going to ask was covered because my first question was the timeline of tier 3 through 5 cuts. So I think we covered that. My only related question is that some of those cuts you did mention affect programs like foreign languages and strings. And so is that something we need to take action on as a committee in some way to consider? Because that's a large part of our, that's curricular. So I'm just raising that question. I don't need an answer, but maybe Ken can answer that later, or Daryl. And my second question was to clarify that I believe I heard you say that one of the unions is not supportive of discussing any changes to steps, COLA, et cetera, at this point in time because they are hoping for funds to come through. I wanted to clarify that I heard that correctly because, well, you can clarify that. I support our teachers, but that is somewhat disappointing to me because that's almost all of tier 2, for example. That's a lot of positions. So did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, Malaya, so I can tell you that's not something that is unique to this district. And I think, in fact, something that is much more consistent with many unions, all different types of unions across the Commonwealth. Because of the unknown, they don't know what types of reductions, or not reductions, they don't know what type of funds are going to be allocated through either the state and or the federal government. So I think there's a level of hesitancy associated with all unions around reductions.
Okay, I understand that. I was clarifying, and that helps. I still would say I understand, but I'm somewhat disappointed given how many people are losing jobs across the country and Commonwealth that we wouldn't even be able to discuss it at this point. But it's fine. I understand, and that perspective is helpful. But it's a lot of positions. You know, when you add up all the positions that are going to be in tier 4 and tier 1, that's a lot of people. And if about $2 million could be saved, it's kind of frustrating to not have that even on the table. But I do support our teachers, so I'm not taking that away. And I know that's a bigger discussion, but thank you for the perspective. That helps. Mm-hmm. Do we have any sense of when that might be revisited, or is it a definite whenever there's a federal funding bill that goes through?
Yeah, I really feel as though there's going to have to be some more definitive information. No one has real information right now,
Right.
and that's what's been frustrating. So from the state level down to the local municipalities and regional school districts, no one has any information. So there's a level of frustration that everyone's ultimately feeling about this right now because it's the unknown. And I understand people are frustrated that everything isn't planned out perfectly right now, but it's challenging when we're not sure what we're attempting to get to ultimately. But
and I completely understand that. I don't mean to come across the wrong way. I do completely
I get
understand
it.
that. I was making sure I heard that correctly in the discussion. So thank you.
Okay, Linda?
Malia asked part of my question. The other part of my question was, in 2008, 2009, I think there were 2 furlough days that were taken. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Is that an option on the table, or has the conversation moved on to these other options, or?
So we did have discussions along those lines. We're the 1 day is where we're at right now, and again, anything like that it's all part of the negotiation process,
right?
That we go through with all the unions. So again, we're talking to all. They're just even those types of things. Again, they're ultimately givebacks in some form or fashion,
right?
Because people are taking money out of their pocket.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to come back to the comment that that Carl, member Ottmer, made with respect to the reopening plan, and I think that he had asked the question, what do we expect that the size of this expense associated with reopening could be? Could it be in the millions or $1 million, just in terms of size and scale? I saw that there was some shaking of the heads no, and maybe that's in reaction to PPE in particular. But it does seem to me, again, as you start to look at some of the thought leadership in different places in the country around what reopening could look like, there are conversations around smaller groups. There are conversations around transporting in smaller numbers. There's conversations around different items that go beyond taking a temperature check at the door, and so it again, I've made the comment in this committee and full school committee. The 2 biggest monumental tasks that we have is budget planning for next year and putting together or starting to model what reopening can look like for next year, and those things need to converge. And it seems to me, and I hear you, Daryl, and I think our hope that at some point Desi's going to tell us exactly how to do it. I, for one, believe that we need to model what this is going to look like for Wachusett. And I don't think that we can wait for the hope that is going to be very prescriptive from Desi. And again, what we don't want to do, and I think what is the bad thing that can happen? To me, one of the worst things that can happen is that we go into a school year and we need to make further reductions. And so I'm not necessarily advocating that we over reduce, but I am advocating for is that we need to accelerate our modeling of what the probable outcomes are and what those things look like. And I don't think that it's if you start to look at some of the thought leadership around reopening, I don't think it's a trivial cost. And when he talks about $1 million or more, and you start to think about the impact of what a class size of 10 or 12 looks like, I find it hard to imagine how you don't get to that number, somewhat quickly.
Mike, just very quickly on the transportation piece. I have had conversations again with AA Transportation in Vanpool again, and both have suggested it might be this or might be that. They are no more clearer on what the large buses will be. Are we going to have 15 kids on an 83 passenger bus? Ron had no idea. I mean, we talked about a situation down in Connecticut where they're looking at 4 days on and 1 day off. But again, nothing definitive here. And they have both said to me, I think out of frustration, is that your guess is as good as mine as to how we're going to look. Kevin has said to me, Kevin Hincamper, president of Vanpool, am I using one vehicle per student next year? I don't know. And if I am using one vehicle per student next year, does that mean I need to order another 100 more vans to transport students to the respective programs? He was as adamant, as frustrated. I don't know. I wish we all knew what that was going to look like, and we don't. And yes, there is a cost associated with that. Ron said to me, he said that if you needed 20 new buses, even if I wanted to give you 20 new buses, I couldn't give you 20 new buses because the factories haven't shut down and they're so far behind in production.
Any other questions regarding contingency planning for next year? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is use of excess and deficiency. Dan, I'll turn it to you.
All right, it'd be nice to put my microphone on. We're making the recommendation for the FY21 budget to use approximately $450,000 of certified excess and deficiency as a means of reducing the assessments to the respective towns.
So I'll entertain a motion as outlined. And I guess I can read it this time. I'll save you, or want to ask you to do it again. The motion as written in the agenda is to recommend that the full school committee authorize WRSD administration to access $450,000 of certified excess and deficiency funds from the excess and deficiency account as a funding source for WRSD fiscal year 21 budget due to expected cuts in fiscal year 21 state education aid from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts due to the COVID-10 crisis. I guess that's COVID-19 crisis.
Typo, sorry.
They were very close to one another, the 9 and the 0. Anyone care to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. Okay, so we'll open for discussion here. I had quite a few questions in regards to this. Dan, in the prelude or the introduction of the motion, you mentioned that this was a motion to offset or reduce rather assessments to the towns. However, as I recall the document that you just walked us through, you were using the excess and deficiency as a reduction, and in fact, the motion states as much, as a reduction to offset what I believe to be state revenues. How do you reconcile those two things?
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, and I'm thinking in terms of the assessments document, we would use these dollars to reduce the total value assessed to the towns. And I'm thinking aloud here, and I apologize if I don't have my thoughts together correctly.
So as you're composing your thoughts, let me share a few comments and observations. And I think maybe it's helpful for folks who might be listening in or are understanding why I asked the question the way that I did. It would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if the purpose of making this motion to use excess and deficiency, as we have done in the past when we've had a larger reservoir of excess and deficiency, to reduce the assessments to the towns, there is typically a corresponding motion to reduce the overall budget so that we do, in fact, reduce the assessments to the overall town. If we are to reduce the assessments to the overall towns, we would not be reducing or using as an offset reduction in state revenue. We would simply be reducing the assessment to the towns. As a practical matter, I'm not sure why we would do that at this point, given all of the uncertainty around our budget. So I guess which one is it? I mean, what are we trying to do with it? Are we trying to use it as an offset, or are we trying to reduce assessments?
I'll speak to the superintendent tomorrow, Mike.
Okay. Ken, you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's up to the administration to recommend what they want to recommend. I agree with you, Mike, 100%. It makes absolutely no sense to be reducing the town's assessments. Eventually you may have to, but my understanding of the intention of this was to, and the way the motion is worded, right, is that it's to offset anticipated reductions in state aid. So if that's not what the administration intends, they need to be clear with us about what they intend, because otherwise, I agree with you wholly, Mike, it makes absolutely no sense. And it shouldn't be listed in the tier 1 as a reduction, right? The anticipation is that we're not going to get the state aid we expect. This is a way to plug that gap. This motion is a way that, as I understand from folks, is acceptable to DOR to plug that fact, but that's up to administration to tell us, not for some random school committee member to have an opinion about.
And Ken, if I can, interject again, I don't know. You're right on target in terms of what I was expecting from this, in terms of this not going back to the towns to lower their assessments. This was really to offset the total dollar amount.
So if what we're saying is that this is not to offset the assessments and this is to reduce the gap that we're experiencing, so then I guess to me, as I'm thinking this through, there's two practical issues. One, it seems to me, I guess to me what weighs most heavy is that we comparatively are very lean in our excess and deficiency. We are at less than 1% in excess and deficiency. We do have a plan for being able to carry over funds in a positive balance situation from this year to next year for the purpose of reducing gaps and reduction of funding. But to tap into what the state might call our rainy day fund, to me seems less than prudent. And the reason being is that if I go back to my principle of making sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where, or to the best of our ability, where we are in mid-school year and need to make further cuts, and we find ourselves in a scenario where there is a second wave of COVID or a third wave of COVID, and there are 9 seat cuts that come down the pike, rather than leveraging the rainy day fund, what very minimal fund that we do have in those cases, or in that situation, or even to be able to roll it over and allow, because we know that this is likely going to be a multi-year problem, to take that in half right up front and apply it to what was a fairly sizable problem, to me seems less than imprudent use of our E&D. And quite frankly, second, if we're going to make that move right at the top, I might expect that we're going to get some questions about why we wouldn't reduce assessments, as was stated in the introduction to this motion. So I have some problems understanding or getting my head around why this is the right thing to do.
So I guess one of the things that we've talked about and bantered about has couple different items. First and foremost, we're still looking to attempt to save as many staff as possible. So we've really spent a ton of time on just trying to realize as much savings in that tier 1 section. I mean, this saves teaching staff. That's what this does. It's $450,000. It's going to go towards staffing. That's what this is. It's another $450,000 worth of staff that we have to look at making reductions with. So that was really, I think, the catalyst for this. In terms of, if there were 9 C cuts next year, and we had $900,000 in our excess and deficiency, we still couldn't touch it. It's going to sit there until the end of the year, and we have to go into the negative in order to get that money to be able to be used. So we don't have access to that during the school year. That has to happen now. If there's a vote for it now to be able to be utilized, you can do that. But once the new fiscal year starts, we're at 0, basically. So that's the other part. So again, I've been an advocate. So here's my dilemma. I've been an advocate of building this up since I've come on board as superintendent. For many, many years, there would be $1 million in excess and deficiency. $1 million would go toward lowering the assessments year after year after year. We would zero out all the time. We've built this back up. We're now in a kind of a crisis mode. This is a way of helping to kind of offset some of the losses that we might see in terms of teaching staff, paraprofessionals, all of those items. But again, we're putting numbers out there as in a way to try to hold on to as many people as possible.
Yeah, no, so appreciate the sentiment. Just a couple clarifying comments or questions around what you just said. The first is, just in terms of the size of our E&D today, I think after we account for the field transfer motion that we've made earlier today, we're at a little less than $1 million in certified E&D. And Dan, just jump in if I'm wrong on that. But I'll
963,000.
Or you can jump in if I'm, even if I am close. Either way is fine. So we're a little under $1 million in E&D. Second, in terms of the certification, I heard a comment that if we don't make a motion now, we can't touch it for next year. I don't believe that's literally true, because in fact, we could have made a motion in this fiscal year to access the E&D. And so my understanding is that if we don't make a motion to access it for next year, and I believe it's supposed to be part of the budget, but I would want to get clarification on that, that once the E&D is recertified, we would then be able to take action as a school committee to access those funds if we deemed it appropriate. What I don't know is when that recertification happens. I believe it's around the December-January timeframe, but I could be wrong. Dan, you might know better.
That's correct. E&D is closed out on June 30. We submit the application, and it would be December, January at the earliest. Typically, DOR looks to address the request of the various cities and towns, so let's just say by the new calendar year that we would have a recertified figure. In which point, if we were to look to tap into those, we'd have to follow the same process as we did a year ago when we looked to access approximately $250,000 for use of the fields, whereby the towns would need to be given 45 days to say yay and nay.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table. Are there any other questions or comments on the motion? And again, this is not a motion to take action. This is a comment to recommend to the full school committee how the committee feels. And you have a comment?
Yeah, just briefly, this isn't relevant for tonight's vote, but just so people are aware, if we take this vote on Monday, it requires 15 positive votes. It's the same as the budget. So it would be a 2/3 majority of the actual seats, not even just the members that are sitting right now.
So do we know, I guess I kind of put the question out there as a hypothetical or not being sure about it, but in this instance, if, for example, it would be the will of a committee to say, yes, let's access $450,000 for E&D for next year, in order for us to use it, does it need to be built in as part of the budget, or can we use it the way that I think we've modified to go back to, which is to say, we're not changing the budget. However, we want to be able to access this $450,000 to be able to offset any reductions in state aid. Is that kosher?
The vote would need to be taken prior to June 30, in essence, to reserve for appropriation for expenditure approximately $450,000 in excess and deficiency for use in the FY21 budget.
But the towns also need to vote that up or down. I guess the question is, do they do that as a separate article, or do they do that as part of the budget? What's the practical, like how do we operate? If we were to do, if it were the will of the committee to do as you say and actually draw down E&D, what's the operational exercise to do that?
It would be my recommendation to, it would be my recommendation to build it into the 21 budget as a revenue source, because currently in the budget that was approved back in March, there was no use of E&D.
So one way that you could do that, for example, is you would send a budget amendment to the towns. If we, for example, if we're not doing what you said we were trying to do at the beginning of this motion, which was to reduce the assessments, if we were to keep the assessments flat and try to offset decreases in state revenue, then we would actually increase the budget by $450,000 and then have that as a revenue source for the budget and keep the assessment flat.
Mike, I don't know if it's even possible at this point to submit this 450 to the towns as a separate warrant article. Their warrants at this point are closed for the 21 article, for the 21 town meetings booked for later on this month.
I would encourage administration to figure this out by Monday.
So Ken, I think your question is just this needs to be figured out. So I don't know if there's any further discussion here. We can either vote on the motion as stated. Somebody can make a motion to withdraw. I look to you, Ken, as a parliamentarian to determine what the right thing is there, or we can just take a vote if there's no other questions.
I mean, technically, if you're just trying to kill a motion without voting no, the motion is to postpone indefinitely.
I'll move to postpone indefinitely.
Is there a second? So we actually have a motion that's in flight, although
Malaya has a question.
Yeah, I see that, but I guess why don't you go ahead and ask your question while we're in the mid-flight of the motion? Go ahead, Malaya. Yeah, it's about the motion. Okay, good.
It's actually about the motion.
Yeah.
Sorry. So it should be a point of order instead of a question. Sorry. If we vote to postpone indefinitely, then that means we can't take it up on Monday, and then we are facing a time situation. Correct?
No, I wouldn't interpret that way. This is just a motion to make a recommendation. So,
Okay,
I mean,
thank
you know, we can actually vote on a motion and vote it however we vote it. Or, as Ben suggested, as in the move, we can vote to just table it, take it off the table and vote on the actual.
And then it will come up again Monday, or it can
If
theoretically.
the administration
We'll try.
decides to push this issue forward and they have better information and clarity around
Yeah.
why we're doing it and what it means, then yeah.
Like what we did with the bus situation. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
This is Member Otmar, point of order.
Yes, sir.
So since to talk through. So since I made the motion, can I withdraw the motion?
No.
Oh, darn.
All right.
Once the motion's made and seconded, it belongs to the floor.
Linda's made a motion to table indefinite. Is there a second to that motion? So then the motion fails for lack of a second. So we'll go back to the original motion, which is the motion on the table. Is there any discussion on the original motion on the table, which is to recommend to the full school committee that they draw down E&D for next year? I'm paraphrasing, but Rebecca, or I read the full motion earlier. No further discussion. Why don't we call the vote? Rebecca?
Dennis,
Dennis, no.
Gustafson,
No.
Haynes,
Yes.
Longbelial,
Abstain.
Otmar, Carl,
Oh, I was on mute. Yes.
you're yes. All right, so it's 2-2-1.
So Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the motion fails for lack of a majority.
It does, yes.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Next item on the agenda is discussion of treasurer's evaluation and contract.
So like I had stated to you via email, Treasurer Dunbar was unavailable to meet this evening. So we need to postpone this.
Okay, so I think the way that I would see this laying out is, you know, if you can, Dan, I think is what we've done in the past is work in advance with the committee on what your feedback is, so that we can synthesize it and, you know, weigh in. And then once we've gone through that process, ultimately we'll have a finalized evaluation and recommendation for Treasurer Dunbar about how we proceed forward that we would present to him. So it sounds like we're not quite there yet today. So we need to make sure that that's on the agenda for next time, and that we have that discussion at the next meeting. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes of May 20th. So entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, Rebecca?
Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson,
Gustafson, yes.
Haynes,
Yes.
Longbelial,
Yes.
Otmar.
Yes.
All righty.
Thank you. Next item is the timing for our next meeting. You know, I think that we've been trying to get out about a week ahead of our full school committee meetings. You know, understanding that July 15th, I'm sorry, I'm looking at July, I mean, actually meant June 15th. That would have given us some more time. Is a week from Monday. I guess I'll, you know, rather than try to schedule a meeting of what I think is the right timing and then get requests from the administration to move it out, I'll look to maybe Dan and Daryl for you to tell me what's the next, when can we expect to have a meaningful update on some of the things we've discussed tonight, and when does it make sense for us to reconvene?
So, Mike, I'll speak to Daryl. I mean, there's an important decision here relative to transportation that is weighing heavily on the 21 budget. I'm hopeful that I can have a discussion with AA Transportation at some point next week. It probably won't be to mid to late next week, but Daryl and I will circle back tomorrow, and I can get back to you on the next meeting.
Okay. Any other discussion around next meeting?
I had a question. It's Malia. Do we need to, for any practical reason, need to meet before the 15th just so we know what is happening before all of town, for instance? It was just a question because that may come into play as well. Is there a practical reason that we need to meet?
Dan, do you guys have any perspective on that?
Again, Mike, I'm not expecting to connect with AA until mid to late next week. I mean, I'm certainly happy to share with the committee an update on where we're at. I'm happy. But I mean, Daryl, you want to jump in here? Is there any?
So I think the way question, Dan and Daryl, relates to the 6:15. So the only deadline that we know of right now is 6:15, and so I think their question is around, or that time happens, ought it be a good idea would it be helpful to the administration for this committee to convene before that meeting?
So, again, I think for something like this would be us talking with you about where we might be again, what our recommendations are around our pink slips. Again, technically, something like this, school committee doesn't vote on pink slip reductions. What they would vote on if there's a big programmatic change associated with something. But not something for non-renewals of teachers. Let me, in all honesty, I need to speak with Dan a little bit more about this, and what we will do is get back to you guys tomorrow morning with something. So if maybe Thursday, one of the things again that I'm looking at with this is. We do have those funds that could be extend our tier one if the busing number comes down from which again from 75 to a 60 to a 50. But right now we're working under the umbrella of 75-25. But if it goes lower, that helps us with tier one, which then presses tier two a little bit more, a little fewer layoffs in that sense. But We'll get back out to that tomorrow morning.
I appreciate that. It was really a procedural question, seeing that we've never been in quite this situation with this number of people before, at least since I've been familiar with this. And from a practical perspective, but also a perhaps knowledge perspective, so we know the final numbers of what you're doing before half the town starts talking about it. I guess it was my other reason, because that will happen.
And Malaya, no matter what, anything that I would do, I would send out to school committee beforehand, so you would know what to expect in terms of social media or phone calls or emails.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, that gong means it must be time for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second. Can that count as a vote?
This is one that did not fail for lack of a second, so we'll go back.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes?
Gustafson, yes.
Yes. Jeff?
Jeff says yes. Jeff's in a hurry.
And Linda?
Yes.
Linda?
Yep.
And Carl?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Good meeting.